Welcome to Theorycraft, a live podcast where game developers and their players engage in conversation. And it's been another 2 weeks. Not much new in the game world as usual, except fucking Elden Ring is out. So we're going to talk about that. But beforehand, I just kind of wanted to warm it up, see where everybody's at. We have John back with us again. He's getting real cozy here. I think everybody is pretty excited about that. John, what have you been up to for the last 2 weeks or things?
They're pretty good. Mostly just working, and last 2 weeks in February, spending time with family and working, playing games. I've been playing, obviously playing Elden Ring, and I was checking out a game with a buddy of mine called Nebulous Fleet Command, which is a very slow real-time strategy game that with you like command spaceships, but the mechanics are basically the Expanse, right? The ships don't have shields. They can take all kinds of damage. It's very dramatic and but also slow. Kind of reminds me of the old Homeworld games. But I was looking at that with a buddy of mine who's really into that kind of sim, and he needed somebody to play with because it's kind of niche.
That's awesome. I have a bunch of friends that have been jamming on Age of Empires 4 and trying to pull me in, but I feel like wading into an RTS, if you don't spend a lot of time in that genre, is just like traumatic memories of getting rushed.
Yeah, what I like about this one is that everything's very slow. There's like APM is kind of irrelevant. It's more strategic than it is tactical.
Candace, and how you been doing?
Doing well. I was telling you I started on like Invisalign, and so I'm trying not to wear it while I do the podcast. But God help me, one day I might have to, and I'm going to sound like an idiot with slurring all my words. But today I've so generously decided not to wear my aligners while I'm on the show. But yeah, I've been playing a lot of Elden Ring. Been playing, or not a lot. Sorry, I played a medium amount of Elden Ring, but a lot amount of Horizon Forbidden West. And then what is that tactic? The new Tactics game is coming out next week, and so like I don't even know what to do with my life.
Triangle strategy, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Few people in the office are excited for that one.
What's it called? Tactics what now?
No, it's Triangle Strategy, but it's basically Final
yeah,
Fantasy Tactics.
yeah. By the Octopath devs.
What is the title that they landed on? Because it was always Project Triangle. And
Triangle
now
Strategy.
yeah, so they just like gave up. Well, I think it's just like hard to trademark a fucking name for a game. It's just like impossible. Like we had to go through that trademark Notorious for the studio, and I'm not looking forward to trying to figure out the name for our game, John. So that'll be John's responsibility.
All you have to do is pick whatever name you want for the game and call it like Candace Thomas's whatever it is. So like
Yeah,
Candace
there you go.
Thomas's Triangle Strategy, and then there you go. It's going to be open, and you know what? I give that to you for free.
I'm looking forward to naming the game. I'll keep that in mind, Candace.
Mhm.
Hey.
You just gotta like state your American McGee ass like authorial intentions right off the bat, you know? You're creating like a tapestry. It's just entry one.
And then just put me in the special thanks, you know? Like, it's fine.
And so, Chris, everyone has been power gaming, it sounds like. What have you been up to?
Yeah, I mean it's crazy. It's been 2 weeks since the podcast. It's flown by. And just working, and work bleeds into real life too. One of my friends, who was also an advisor for our studio, came down and visited, and also hung out with our other advisor. You know him, Jelinek, right? John Jelinek, Candace. And so we chatted, and they visited the team and stuff, and then we had like Korean barbecue at midnight. that was fun. And then so I also went with him and visited LA for a bit and met some people there. And then I've been playing Elden Ring. I waited till the weekend to play it, just because so much was going on, and ended up playing it till like 4 a.m, and then the next day just slept till like noon, at least noon. So it's poop socking games and going like hard like that. It gets harder as you get older, right? So
It's true. You really got to appreciate those moments when they come.
Yeah, I was talking with you, Luca, the other night about like, you're trying to get all hard into, because you went really hard into New World. You were just like in.
Ridiculously, dude. It was like
it
220
was
hours in a
insane.
month or something. Yeah, it was not good. For
Yeah,
anyone.
but for Elden Ring, you're like, you know what? I like my routine of baking my bread and doing parkour or whatever.
Yeah, I kind of like pre-boxed out my weekend and told my friend like, yo, I just pre-ordered this. Here's a link to the Metacritic page. There's a countdown on it. So you know this game is going to be fucking lit. And that's what I'm up to this weekend. And I ended up playing it for like 2 hours because I was just like, I kind of keep wanting to finish Succession. And then I wanted to do all my normal shit. And yeah, I don't know. I just wasn't in the mood to like surrender all my habits to a game again just yet. It might still happen, but I haven't. Notably up here, I guess it's not really ever something y'all notice down in California because the weather's just the same all the time, but it's starting to stay lighter for noticeably longer up here now, which feels fucking great because it feels like there are things you can actually do after work again. When it's dark up here for the winter, I feel like as soon as 5 hits and it's rainy all the time, you just want to go home immediately. And like last night was the first night I left the office and was able to ride to the parkour gym and do something else, and it was like, the day isn't done yet. It felt really good. It was full of energy, praise the sun and all that. So anyways, let's just get into the topic. So like, why is Elden Ring such a significant title? It's been doing insane on rankings. I've never had played any kind of a Souls or a Soulsborne kind of game before this point. Like, what's the deal with From Software? Why are we so hype about this release?
I mean, it has a really niche audience, and it serves that audience impeccably, right? It's unflinching in its design and in its difficulty. And in fact, like, they don't give a fuck about teaching you to play this game. Like, at least Elden Ring.
Yeah, I've
like
noticed.
The tutorial is actually hidden. Like, if you follow the path of least resistance from starting the game to getting to the open world, you will miss the tutorial. It's not unless you like fall down a hole do you opt into the tutorial of this game. And that's because that's what serves that audience. The people that are playing Elden Ring have already played Bloodborne. They've already played Dark Souls. They've already played Demon Souls at this point. They don't need to know that you have to hit fucking right bumper to attack, Though I do think some of the buttons are a little bit different. Sorry?
Can we talk about the tutorial guy for a second?
I would love to.
Because I walked up to him and he's like, you should jump in this hole. And I was like, I'm not stupid.
Yeah, I need to go back to this hole is what it sounds like. Because I fucking walked by. I thought I was being trolled.
Like rule number one of like a Souls-like game is that there is going to be a thing that tells you to jump off of something and it's going to kill you, right? Like that's just, they're everywhere. Every ledge in the game has tried jumping on it from some other player.
Dude,
and the appraisals are always high because like the game in and of itself, that element of the game is such a meme. Right. And I think it's like a fun from the devs. It's this really fun nod to their players. But at the same time, the tutorial is literally targeted at the wrong audience because of that.
I mean, I feel like the tutorial was just there because they felt like they had to do it, but nobody wanted to do it. And they're like, fine, I'm literally going to throw it in a fucking hole.
Well, this is true for, I think, game designers everywhere is like building a tutorial for your game is always the last thing that you do.
Mm-hmm. Malicious compliance.
Yeah, and like the reason it's the last thing that you do is because if you build it when you're halfway done, the mechanics are going to change, and you're just going to have to do it again. So you build the tutorial last, and there's always a little bit of like you do it begrudgingly, right? Like someone's going to need this, and we should try and help them find it. But I think in this particular case, it just backfired because who listens to a ghost that tells you to jump off a cliff?
It's also incorrect a couple of times in what it tells you to do and how to use your stuff. I don't remember which 2 places it was, but the first time I was like, oh, that's odd. The tutorial was already wrong. And then it happened again. I was like, the tutorial is wrong as fuck and I'm angry. But this is a Dark Souls game, so I'm supposed to be angry.
It tries to teach you about mechanics that you can or cannot do based on what starting kit you have, right? Like there's an explicit moment where they tell you to like attack after blocking. But if you picked the warrior and you have both swords in your hand, your block button is another attack button. And it is literally impossible for you to block. Like it's a failure on all counts, really.
It didn't even to conditionalize it or tailor it for each class. Interesting. Maybe that's what it was that happened. I was like, that's not how that works at all.
But that's kind of what the audience wants. Like it's basically hurt me more. Like the more obtuse and obscure and difficult things are, it's like that's what you're fucking there for, right? You're not really even allowed to complain.
Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of pushback or blowback, let's say, on Twitter and whatnot about Elden Ring and just like, this is unacceptable. Why is it not clear? And because I think there's a lot of expectations with a lot of new players getting into Elden Ring or into like the Souls type of game that that it's people hear, oh, it's like Breath of the Wild or it's like Horizon or whatever, and it's not. It's
Yeah.
not as clear as that, right? And so it's like, well, welcome. Yeah, I saw a lot of people's saying like, I was gonna. This is why I should have bought it physical so I could have traded it in afterwards, right? So
Mm.
Oh, has there been a lot of that? Because when I checked on the day that, like 2 days after the game shipped, it had like a perfect score, and I'm like, this is what happens when you serve a given audience very well consistently. And I was very like blown away that it had like a perfect score, and not because
Metacritic.
it's not a great game, but it's just because it was like nobody poo-pooed on it, even though it's an extremely difficult game. Now I want to check
Metacritic,
it.
I think, and the disparity between the Metacritic and the user score is always interesting on Souls games because there's always sort of like the charmingly befuddled folks that like buy this game because it's advertised like any other video game.
Mm-hmm.
The exception of that one campaign they did where they were like, no, this game is going to kill you, the Prepare to Die campaign. But that was like years and years ago, right? Totally different crowd looking into this kind of content now. And they show up and they're like, I bought this game expecting it to be like a fun RPG, not something that made me hate myself and feel like a bad gamer. So now not only can I not take it back because returning a video game is impossible in many areas of the world, but also I'm sad. It's a fascinating conundrum, Candace. I think you really hit the nail on the head though. Like they very specifically build the game to cater to a very specific subset of humans. And I think that the fail point this time around is that the hype of the product, because like it's a subset of people, right? But it's not a small group. It still sells millions of copies. This time, the hype around it was really heavily driven, I think, by that sort of grassroots movement and people bringing their friends into it and telling them how awesome the Dark Souls games are. And yeah, Elden Ring is going to be amazing, and it's the one to get into if it's your first time.
Well, and also the George R. R. Martin, like people did
Yeah,
like Game of Thrones, and they blamed, the downfall of Game of Thrones on whenever he handed it off to the writers, and probably rightfully so. So, people were pretty hungry for more of his work, and so they thought that they'd be able to experience that through this medium, not really understanding what else was going to come with it.
and well, also anybody who's familiar with the dev of the previous games, right? Like they know that this isn't going to be some like epic yarn full of drama. It's going to be obtuse, and the storytelling is going to be weird, and like you're going to have to infer tons and tons of stuff kind of on your own, and it's things that players will be discussing on Reddit for years to come about like what is this character's motivations really, and they say this thing in this tone of voice, and I interpreted it that way, and maybe that's why the world of Elden Ring is the way that it is. So like you weren't even going to get like the thing that Martin is known for, right, which is really well constructed fantasy storytelling. But what we did get is a really well constructed fantasy world. However, I don't think that was a weak point of any of their games like this. Like Sekiro and Bloodborne and all of the Souls games have incredibly strong fantasy worlds with unbelievable art direction. So I don't know if like bringing in George R. R. Martin other than as a name did anything more than get a whole bunch of people interested in a game for whom the game is not intended. And they kind of like crashed against it. Like there's this wave of new people coming into this experience woefully unprepared. They're crashing into a cliff and they're being frustrated, and they may very well like never attempt it again. So I think that it's kind of a miss on FromSoft's part, because they could have really brought in a lot of people, a lot of additional players, like permanent customers to their product if they had eased up a little bit on
Well,
these sort of like insane masochism required
for sure.
to finish the game.
I buy that. Like if they had borrowed from the accessibility options of Horizon Zero Dawn or something, but then it wouldn't so hyper specific target that audience. I was actually going to mention what you made me think of was in a game like EverQuest, there's this personality test that you have to go through if you're going to get to max level. Back in the day, back in like the heyday of EverQuest, right? Which is like first time you die in EverQuest, you had to go get your corpse, and it was like dark outside, and you couldn't find it. And there's nothing on a map. You just had to be like, what do I do? And for a lot of people, that's like the moment of churn, right? Like, I,
Mm-hmm.
I bought this game and it's completely unplayable. I'm just lost all the time. They didn't know like no, levels weren't like linear or 2D or anything like that, and so people didn't know what to do in this like fully immersive, huge 3D world. They didn't know they had to keep track of where they were going. They didn't know they had to carry a light source with them or even loot their body whenever they died, or else they'd be naked and had to start from negative. It's like not starting from zero, because also you can't buy any gear when you're dead. And I think that the kind of person that would make it to max level in a game like EverQuest is like not like a similar person, but it definitely filtered out the kind of people like the casual, like, oh, George R. R. Martin played the, I don't know what this title is, and it's going to be an amazing like action-based story game like the Shadows of Mordor. I can't wait for this. And then they churn, right? And I think that it's a really interesting way to think about, and of course for like a single player game that obviously sucks, right? But if you're thinking about it from an MMO standpoint, like some of my best friends on this planet are still some of the people I played EverQuest with, and I think that because they passed, like we had the same personality, like we had the same drive to get to level 60, and that wasn't easy, or 55 back in the day. And so it's just really interesting, like to think about, was there space for that, or is there more space for that kind of personality test in the MMO genre, or do MMOs need to be that accessible? Because I was also going to like last thing segue, because MMOs are often known for like their big sprawling open worlds. I think once you get past the tutorial and once you get past that first boss and you like open the open world of Elden Ring, I actually noticed like the game is horrifically easy. So I do wonder if they were like, sorry, not like the whole game is easy, but like there's two difficulties for me for monsters in that game. There's like I literally one shot them from my horse, or I two shot them with my projectile, or there's I'm going to be in combat with this motherfucker for 8 minutes, and there is no in between. There's like nothing. And so I think you could achieve like a modicum of success doing a lot of farming in the open world. So in that sense, I do think it's more of an accessible game than the rest of them, but they do give you that personality test at the beginning. It's like, no, fuck you. Like you're in a very linear dungeon, and the first boss is literally, spoiler alert, the first boss is literally going to have to always kill you, and then you're gonna watch some more cutscenes.
How just for clarity, how far into the game are you? Like, can you give me an idea of what you've made it to?
I made it to the Divine Hammer boss. That like, so at phase 1 he has like a hammer and he's jumping around, and then phase 2 he has like a sword, and
It starts with like so it's like Mitrin or Mitra or something. He's got an odd name.
yeah, I think that's
Um,
it. And I even like
yeah,
summoned another player to help me, and I
yeah.
just I was the bandit. I had no luck, and then someone's like, I'm not gonna spoil it, but there's like an item you can get to make that easier, and I was like, fuck that. I'm gonna try a new class, and so I rolled the astrologer just to see what a magic caster was like.
I re-rolled as well. I started as a samurai, and I made it past that boss on samurai, and I kind of got into Stormvale Castle, which is where the game feels the most like Dark Souls so far for me. I agree with your sentiment about the open world. That area that they start you in, with the exception of the giant gold man on the horse,
The tree sentinel.
is
One does not fuck with the tree sentinel.
yeah, he's like the lesson. Right? He's the lesson where it's like you're like, oh, a big shiny man, I'm going to take him out and take his stuff, and no, the answer is no, you're not, and he's going to teach you a lesson. But
And he's the first enemy you see when you open the open world. There's like this sprawling field of beautiful like greens and red flowers and like this autumnal sky, and then there's this majestic horse and this dude that's like clad in full gold, and he's just casually walking by, and yeah, he is a complete ass beater. Like you see him before you even see the birds.
He's not technically the first enemy you see, because if you're like me and you have not played a Souls game before and you want to test the edges, you attacked the first NPC that talks to you, and then you discovered that he permanently aggroes to you and like fucking is just like, do you even know who I am? And he's just like on your shit the whole time. And you respawn directly in front of him and he's still aggroed to you. So my tutorial was having to respawn like 30 times until I figured out how to beat that dude. And then after that, every single other like little gnome or goblin I fought roaming around feels like a joke. But I had some player notification that said something about the tree sentinel, just like look upon horse. And I was just like, okay, well, maybe they're telling me get a horse before I fuck with this guy. So I have not been chopped down yet, but I'm going to go do that.
I walked up to him because I thought he was a friendly NPC.
Yeah, so that's where I learned. I've remembered that when you play this game, you spam the right stick a bunch so that it locks on to the closest enemy, so you can tell who's enemy and who's not an enemy. I forgot about that.
Yeah, the areas after the starting area, though, on horseback, they get significantly more challenging.
Oh, okay.
It is
I just
not fun. It is not fun for me to run around in the world on horseback because it seems like everything in the world has can either run faster than your horse, like the things that are actually dangerous. I don't mean the little fodder guys that are stumbling around, but the things that are actually dangerous can either catch up to you or they have an attack that moves faster than your horse that knocks you off your horse. So like I wanted to take a break from kind of like a hardcore farm and just kind of run around in the world and find new map pieces to see more of the actual map. And I'm having a tough time even doing that because the sort of like the core tenets of like open world design of like roads are less dangerous than wilderness and things like that just don't apply here. They just threw all of that out the window and it's just awful all the time and you're constantly sort of getting attacked and you're in this arbitrary combat state with things that chase you really, really far, and then when they reach their leash point, they shoot something at you that goes really fast. They're so far away that you don't hear the sound effect of the shot, and the object traveling at you makes no sound either, so you just get hit.
It's fucking brutal.
I
wonder
didn't
if
even
they,
know
yeah.
like it turns into that. Like I thought, because my experience is kind of like Candace's. Is just like the open world area and the parts that I'm in are just like, well, I just go on my horse, or I summon some things in that help me, and it's just pretty easy and low and chill. And I kind of thought like maybe that was like their intention. It's like, well, the open world's the accessible baby
Right.
place, and then you just hub and spoke into like, oh, this is Dark Souls, like the castles and stuff. And that's not a bad formula. It's okay. I definitely think in the open world, and maybe it sounds like from John, it's just the mountain and the sort of difficulty changes later on. But the mount was really interesting, Candace, because it's like it's a mount. It's a mount that I think even the WoW team wouldn't do, which is like you double jump on it, you could just attack from it, kite around.
you
They're
collect
really
herbs from it.
forgiving with it, right?
Yeah. After playing Horizon for an amount of hours, and you can't collect things on the Mount and Horizon, I was like, oh, and Dark Souls finally gave me what I wanted. Who knew?
Yeah, it kind of feels toyish, is the way I think about it.
The mount is very reminiscent of the mount in Ghost of Tsushima. Like
Yes.
it's very like flexible and mobile, and it kind of has its own control rules. Like you can't like turn on a dime or anything. It has a turning radius and stuff, which has killed me a couple of times. But the aside from like the double jump, which fine, it's a magical mount, but, like collecting things and attacking from it, I was also kind of surprised that all of these things were possible or as necessary as they are. Like there are instances in the open world where if you are not on horseback fighting, you are doing it wrong. And you're sort of like making a mistake. So there are definitely moments where you're expected to fight from horseback in spite of the relatively limited set of options that you have. I also think
Yeah.
that it makes the mount is it's cool, but it feels like it exists as a solution to the terrible open world traversal and sort of like open world spatial design conventions that they have, right? Like there are so many instances of like a low object that your character can't jump over because they're not, shrinking the collision capsule so you can get up on top of it. And the solution for that is like get on your horse thing and like double jump. But in reality, the thing is waist high and you just can't jump that high. And I think that it's very clearly to me the sort of first attempt for the dev team as at an open world game, and we're sort of like witnessing the mistakes that they've made along the way.
Yeah, John, I totally agree with you. A lot of it feels like problem solving, but one of the problems like that needs to be solved. It's really funny you mentioned the chest high collision thing because of course they have to have that be a thing so that when you go into dungeons you can still have that linear experience and you're not just like, you know, hopping over walls to get to a place you shouldn't get to and all that stuff. And so that obviously like they weren't going to put like climbing or grappling into the game in a significant way, but I was going to mention that like if you do have an open world game that is supposed to feel big and it's supposed to feel vast and you're supposed to be very immersed, which like Dark Souls is poised, or Elden Ring is poised in such a way that you can be fully immersed while you're in the world the whole time, because you are just deathly afraid of dying at every moment. You have to be aware of where the next grace, that's like the campfire in the Dark Souls games. You have to be acutely aware of how many souls you have on you and whether or not you've used them and who's around you and all that stuff. And so like you're just like white knuckle immersed all the time. And so my thinking about the mount was that it was the only joy they could give you. Like, if you're going to make a huge world where you spend 50% of your time traversing and 50% of your time fighting, and relatively like low number of enemies, right? Like you fight monsters for 2 or 3 minutes at a time. Um, you need to have traversal be joyful and fun. Like what you're talking about, there's like a lack of traversal mechanics. You think about Horizon, they have like these grappling gun and they have like climbing on walls. You think about Breath of the Wild, you can skate on your shield, or you can, there's like zip lines, there's gliders, there's just, they need to make getting from point A to B fun so that the game is still 50% fun. It doesn't matter how fun your combat is in an open world game. If like players can't have a good time getting from point A to B, then it's going to fall flat, like you're talking about here. And I think like bring that to WoW, which we have a lot of experience with. WoW became a game that became increasingly more convenient as you could teleport to places or fly to places or flying mount to places. And I think that's in response to open world games like this, or like Breath of the Wild rather, really upping the ante on what it feels like to traverse through the different biomes of the game and make those meaningfully different and fun and present the world as a puzzle and not just a piece of beautiful art that's like the backdrop to the combat experience.
That's really what that is here, right? Like there's lots when you're building an open world game, there's lots of things to consider, and traversal is only one of them. Like content frequency is hugely important, and I don't just mean like a patrolling group of mobs on the road. The ability for the player to move from meaningful content piece to meaningful content piece and feel like they're discovering something new or having a new experience is really important in the open world. And the open world in Elden Ring does not have a whole lot of that, or a whole lot of that in a way that is evident. You can see like the little symbols will pop up on the map when you get near a landmark or something, but there's so many things that are just deliberately not a part of the map overview that you could be passing by without ever realizing it. Like game kind of like takes a step back, like 15 years into the past of the way open world, like pre-Skyrim open world games used to work, and it suffers for it. It's not particularly fun. And then to your point about like traversal on the mount being fun, there are explicit examples of situations where FromSoft did not want you to be able to get from one area of the world to another area of the world without going the way they want you to go. And it's manifest in through fall damage, which I think is just the worst way to do it. Like your horse has a double jump, and if you jump off a cliff, every single player who's ever played a game with a double jump in the world will attempt to soften their landing with the double jump. And in this game, they just tell you to get fucked. They're like, nope, not from this cliff. I know you double jumped while you were 10 feet from the ground and completely stopped your downward movement, but you're dead anyway. Even though
I'm
it's valid
muting
game
myself
space.
because I'm just cracking up right now.
Right? It's an example of like of this very like it's an example of like the discrete conditional level design that the Souls games, like the Dark Souls games, and their sort of like corridors and dance floors encounter design model is known for, right? Like, yes, if you jump off of this, you're going to die. There's no secret way down. We just don't want you to go down there. But when you apply that to the open world and the sort of like exploratory nature of players, and you give them tools that effectively create the illusion of that freedom, all you're going to do is frustrate them and make them put the game down.
Dude, preach. In a game about dying, it's like the most unfun fucking way to die so far.
I was chatting with a couple of folks here at Noto. We were sort of chatting about how Elden Ring is one of the most put-downable games that we've played in a while. Like it's just easy for you to be playing and be like, you know what? I just fell off a thing. I'll deal with that tomorrow. I'm gonna decompress. I'm gonna go do something else, and maybe I will come back. Right? How many players have put the game down thinking they'll come? Like how many players were playing last night, put the game down thinking they'll come back to it today, and when they sit down in front of their computer or in front of their PlayStation or whatever and pick up a controller, they say, no, you know what? I'm just gonna watch Netflix. Or, oh, I'll play Horizon instead. and it's killing any. I feel like they've killed any chance of like a true like surge of popularity outside of the niche that they already serve with this product.
It's like you read my mind. Like last night was exactly that. Like I finished everything I was supposed to do. I made myself some dinner and I was like, okay, I'm gonna play some fucking Elden Ring finally. I went for a run. Like I was so accomplished and I was like, now I've done every adult thing I need to do for the day. I'm going to play some Elden Ring. But I was like exhausted from running and then I sat down on my couch. I like turned on my PlayStation and I turned on Elden Ring and I was like, I can't right now. Like I emotionally cannot. There was this camp that like when I put the game down last time, it's like that first camp. I re-rolled the astrologer. It's that first camp when you get out that you can. There's a guy that like calls for help, and so if he calls for help, he brings everybody, including like this guy with a javelin or a spear. It's really hard. Not spear, lance. That's the word. And I figured out that that's actually the optimal way to pull that camp is to like get that guy to call for help and then use your AoE on them. Otherwise, you don't have enough mana to like kill them and the boss. And so for like 5 or 6 tries, I pulled that camp and then on the one on the time that I actually had success, I AoE'd everyone down. I had this excellent like damage to mana ratio. I swapped to my single target because I was fighting like the boss, the hard guy, and I had him. I crit 2 times. Like everything was going in my favor. I was so happy. I was riding that high, and then he like randomly impaled me. I got caught once, and I put all of my flasks into mana and not into hit points. I had like the 1 hit point flask, and I was like, oh, that's okay. He's at like 25% health, and I'm just now using my flask. I've got this. And then, anyways, long story short, he died at the same time that I died, and I was so fucking frustrated. I
Oh,
was
you had a
like,
trade.
it was a trade right
Had a
there
trade.
on a perfect run that should have just like been right there in my hand. So anyways, I sit down on my couch and I'm like, how am I ever gonna replicate that run? I got 2 crits on him super early and I killed all the dudes in like 3 fell swoops and I was so exhausted that I was like, okay, well maybe Elden Ring is not for me. And so then in my mind I'm like, I'll play some Horizon Zero Dawn or Horizon Forbidden West. So I closed the application, and as I'm hovering over Horizon Forbidden West, I was like, I'm going to watch Married at First Sight. And then I
Oh.
turned on the TV.
I do think something bears mentioning though. Just like some personal history for me. I was when I was growing up, there was like Sega Genesis and NES, right? It was kind of like that era. It was the real rise of the first console war, and my family we weren't poor, but I wasn't swimming in video games either. And there is a group of people who really only buy like 2 or 3 video games a year, and it's because they can afford it, or that's how they choose to engage in the medium, or whatever. Like it could be financial or preference or whatever, and because they want to extract like the maximum possible value of incredibly deep experiences. So like if that's your jam, I think that like if you're just trying to like play a game where mastery is sort of the be all end all of the experience and knowledge of the mechanical sets available to you are critical to success. Like Elden Ring is an unbelievable value proposition, right? $60 for one of if not the best RPGs ever made, because it is that good. In spite of the shortcomings that we're talking about right now, is tremendous. However, if you are a person who is used to really like getting into getting into a game and getting through it, it's not going to be a fun time for you. Like if you're a person who consumes video games and moves on, that's not the kind of game that it is. It's a game that's designed to be sort of dissected and divined in a way that not very many other games are.
Yeah, and that's present in everything, right? That's present in the level design, especially of the more linear Souls games. It's in the way that you are like mastering every corner. You know which pull has a monster behind it. You get surprised and delighted sometimes by traps that you didn't expect. And they're really like getting you to memorize it almost like a roguelike in that way. And the story is the same way too, right? Like they're not going to spoon feed you the story. I mean, outside of the cinematics or whatever, but even those are pretty vague. They're just like, here's the world, and you're learning more about the world by thinking about it, instead of it being told to you. You have to infer a lot of stuff, and in the combat as well. I mean, like obviously, there's not only is there like milliseconds of nuance between um, how you execute your actions and the patterns of buttons that you push and the directionality and the myriad of attacks you can use versus your enemies, but then every enemy is its own story, right? Every enemy has and shit in Elden Ring, I feel like they have way more abilities than they did in Dark Souls or Bloodborne. Like every monster has like 6 or 7 abilities because they all, not every monster, but every boss for sure, because they all have like a 50% change or maybe like a 33 and a 66% change in their phase, and there's so many different attacks to learn and to learn how to master those, given like where are you going to dodge, are you going to block, are you going to try to perfect block, all that stuff. And so like yeah, I totally buy it. Like if you're someone who just wants to love the shit out of every minute of a video game and you want to learn the ins and outs of it and you're like mastery driven and you're patient, like this is absolutely like the ultimate RPG for you.
Does seem like you could really just not read anything and just slowly wade through this for like a year and never run out of stuff to do. I don't know. That combined with how put-downable it is kind of means like, are you even going to? Like I've had a little bit of that. Like my first boss encounter that I had after 4 or 5 deaths, I started feeling like, okay, I can see that I can probably do this, but it's going to have to happen after I like, wake up, I'm fresh. I take my like fucking alpha brain 20-minute Peloton sesh. Like when conditions are perfect, I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to microsecond this boss. And I might just be bad at video games, but it feels like the stakes are high enough and it's punishing enough that I might just not do that and just continue to bake bread like I have been. We have Kruger up on stage. What's your question, dude?
Hi, hello guys. So I have a couple of things in mind about Elden Ring. I haven't played it yet myself, but I'm planning to do so this weekend, I think. My question is related to games nowadays holding players' hands because, for example, if we look, I don't know, at World of Warcraft, if you compare vanilla to retail, what it is now, the amount of hand holding in retail is just immeasurable compared to vanilla. And I feel like this is a general trend in gaming. And I'm wondering if this might be the case why a lot of people who I think are new to Soulsborne games and their first game is Elden Ring, why they might think the game is either too hard or they have too difficult of a job trying to find their way through the game because they're not used to games of this type. And I would like to hear your opinion on whether you prefer games that hold player hands or the ones that just let you explore the game themselves.
Ooh, I'll tackle that one first. I completely agree with you. I think that kind of hand holding is an accessibility play for video games, and when you look at the studios that are making AAA games, they need to have broad appeal. They need to be really accessible, or else they're not going to pull in the kind of money that's going to justify the budget that you spent to hire 1,500 people to make the game that you made. And so like you're just leaving money on the table by not making it accessible. That said, that is going to come at a cost of some immersion and some attachment, right? So if you're the kind of person that doesn't want to have your hand held, then you're going to be averse to that kind of thing. But also, even if you're not averse to it, you might not attach to it as much because you're not mindfully or thoughtfully playing the game. You're just kind of like blowing off steam and absorbing, like kind of letting the game happen to you, as opposed to finding the fun and doing it yourself. It's like the difference between like reading a book as a kid. Like when I was a kid, before we had, I guess there were still video games when I was a kid, but like when I was a small child before I started playing video games, like I could read a book when I was 5 years old and I could like let it like absorb it. And sometimes when you're reading a book, you can like read into things or add context to things from your life and make it kind of personal. Like, or you can invite your friends over and you can play dolls, or we would play Barbies, or we would play like puppy surprises or whatever, or the toys. And that was like the game that you made of it, right? Like we would make the little rules like, I'm the mommy and you're the auntie and we're trying to raise the puppies or whatever. And so in that sense, it's like way more immersive. And I didn't mean to be like super reductive about video games, but I just wanted to say like in a game that holds your hand a lot and kind of like spoon feeds you stuff, it's more in the vein of like reading a book. Whereas like sometimes all you want to do is like find your own fun, or sometimes like make something your own, like I guess the more adult version of that is going to an art gallery, whereas like everyone's going to see a piece of art and experience a different emotion, or associate it to a different, their own life experiences. When you ask like which one I prefer, and it's like, well, just depends on what kind of mood I'm in. Do I want to absorb and enjoy, or do I want to, or sorry, do I want to like sit back and be entertained, or do I want to really like pour some hard thought and intention into what I'm doing? And generally, I like to do the latter and not the former. But sometimes you just want the former.
Yeah, I think just a lot of it's just like know your audience. Who's your audience here? And yeah, Elden Ring could have just not even had a tutorial because I think they're just so targeted to their core audience who plays all these games. And there's a sizable number of them and they're growing. And so that could have been enough, right? The whole kind of like early level tutorial thing is like I think we've had a whole show on this before, but it's it's something that I think is really fascinating, interesting. Because when WoW was trying to add in retail a tutorial, it's like, oh, we need to show players how to like right click and left click and use WASD. And I was just thinking, well, there's like 15 million players who played this game when it didn't have that tutorial. It's just like, were those people just geniuses or what? And so I think it just yeah, I think it just sort of just depends on your audience. And sometimes when games are so handholdy and just have so much tutorialization and just it just you kind of lose your audience at that point and the player kind of feels like they're what's the word like talked
It's
down to
way
or
fucking worse
just
when you don't
Yeah,
respect your
patronizing.
audience's intelligence at
yeah,
all. I
respect your
mean,
audience. There you go. That's what I was
yeah.
Though I must say, even though I tend to prefer games where I can make my own fun, right? Like I like MMOs that way and I like survival games in that way because I play with my friends and we decide who's going to do a lot of the crafting and who's going to do a lot of the exploring, and we're all going to raid together and all that stuff. But I will also say that I have very little tolerance now as I age, I think, for games that don't clearly communicate what you're supposed to do. So like even if there's not the pop-up on my screen that says like press B to jump, like I don't care, like whatever. When a game is like, "Oh, you should have done this thing like 15, like you should have grabbed the." Here's an example. I played Undertale. I fucking love Undertale. Please do not misunderstand me here. But I'm like, you didn't buy the spider donut from the spider bake sale. You're gonna have a bad time. And I was like, God damn it! I wish anything had told me that I was supposed to buy the spider donut, or or sometimes like less so in like the story, but sometimes in like the UI or in the controls, or like there's like a game I didn't even know you had an auto run for a long time because it was just so hidden. I was like, oh, it's an auto run in Valheim. It's like, God damn
Yeah.
it.
I mean, that's the other thing too, is that some developers can see tutorials or like that sort of thing as a band-aid for just unintuitive controls, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's also not a good thing. If like you need a tutorial for and everybody to do it to understand how to jump or how to attack or general things like that, well, you probably had something's wrong there.
Yeah, wasn't like I feel like the birth of this kind of long form video essays on games and game design really started with that fucking Ego Raptor video on Mega Man X's first level way back when he just like rapturously was talking about how the position of all the platforms and what enemies spawn and what happens when just intuitively teaches you how Mega Man works, how you can charge your shots, what you're supposed to do. And it's difficult once you've sort of glimpsed games that like do it very well without over tutorializing to kind of accept things that are either like too obtuse or too handholdy. But I mean, I guess it must just be incredibly difficult to split it, down the middle and really nail it. Like that's just great game design, especially when the tutorial elements get done so late, as kind of John pointed out. They're just usually going to be problematic.
It's interesting to me when people point to that Mega Man video where he's talking about how it teaches you how to play the game as you're playing it. There's like 7 things you can do in Mega Man, right? Like at any given time in Elden Ring, there's 7 things that one button does, right?
Yeah,
So
certainly
like
the circle button does a lot, does
it's just
probably too
very different.
much.
There there is a level of teaching that needs to happen in modern games
That's
that
true.
just
This
didn't
isn't
need to
Celeste.
happen on the
Yeah,
NES,
yeah.
right? So I think that like while there's an elegance there, and like I think it's a really great example of sort of like core tenets of tutorialization. When your inputs are all single function, we very quickly get into apples and oranges when we're talking about like complex combat systems. Like Candace, I bet you don't know this in Elden Ring, but if you have a heater shield, if you have a shield that an attack will bounce off of in the game, and immediately after that happens, you press the heavy attack button, you do a repost that will basically stun most like lower tier enemies and open them up for a hard counter.
Wow. Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah, the game
And
is on easy mode at that point for everything except for the spear guy that you're talking about. Because like he still plays by those rules. He just doesn't get interrupted so that you can like exploit. You can like exploit stab. Like so you'll get a free hit on him basically, assuming he doesn't have a fast follow attack. And like I discovered that by accident because I was just like I just tried to do a heavy attack after I blocked something. I was playing as a confessor, and now it has trivialized easily 80% of the combats in the game now
wow.
because of
You
just how overpowered it is.
you just explained what some like cryptic player message on a ground in outside of the boss room I went into meant for me. So thanks, but also maybe fuck you because now I can't unlearn that, and I'm probably just going to have to get through the game that way.
It kind of it actually like it made the game a little dull for me, right? Because now everything in front of me that's not like it's not sort of like that like high that like mid to high tier guy is just an annoyance, right? It's just a thing I have to do, and I do it the same way every time, and
But
it's not fun.
that kind of brings me into what I was going to comment on, which is and it's okay to not properly tutorialize things and especially when you have so many tools in your toolkit, like you were saying, John, like you have to teach the player 25, 30 concepts within the first hour of the game, or else they're not going to understand the breadth of what they can do in combat and all this stuff. And so like at some point they're just going to get overloaded. And so it's okay to either like stagger them out or do like the Mega Man thing where you make the perfect situation for you to do something, and then maybe the player can figure out, maybe I'll try something new because this pull is so hard I can't engage it in the same way that I normally engage. Like I'm okay with not tutorializing some things like that if they're very clear and consistent rules. So what I appreciate about your experience with this like block and heavy attack combo is that it appears to be mostly consistent through the game, except for I guess there's enemies that don't have like heavy hit react or hit stun sometimes. But like the fact that you did it once on accident and then you were able to say, "Can I do that again?" And the answer was emphatically yes over 80% of the time, then you're like, okay, this is a thing that wasn't taught to me, but it was like something I was able to learn through absorb via mastery, and the rule is so consistent that now I trust it and I will keep using it, right?
Interestingly enough, if you had had a shield that works like this when you did the tutorial, you would have known about it from the beginning.
What fuck? What?
Yeah, the tutorial teaches you how to do this, but only if you have an item that makes it possible to do this. This is like why the generic tutorial for like the broad range of like starting kit that they have in the game ultimately fails to teach you anything, because if you go in as a warrior, for instance, and you do the tutorial and you have a scimitar in each hand, and it tells you like press left bumper to guard and then counter I think they actually just call it a guard counter. Press left bumper and then attack to do a guard counter. You're going to press left bumper and do like a spinny scimitar attack, because when you have when you have a weapon in your offhand, that is your attack. That's your attack button. So it's really yeah, it's a failed tutorial in a lot of ways that only conditionally applies specifically.
Cool. Doc, another point for the most accessible Dark Souls game to date, I guess. Thanks for the question, Kruger. We also have...
Thank you for your insight.
Yeah. We got Mary Poppin' Caps on stage. What is going on?
Hello. I guess I have been listening to you guys for talking through Elden Ring. Now I have a million questions, but I'll go with the two that I can narrow it down to. So I guess the first one is growing up as I guess I'm 28. So when I played Diablo 1, I was about 7 years old. And in that game, the cost of dying, if you played hardcore, was your character's gone. So I'm curious if the cost of dying in a game has been reduced so that dying is just an annoyance, right? You have to collect your body or you lose a little bit of XP. And so when people play games like Elden Ring or Dark Souls, you just have to either you grab your souls or your runes, or you lose it and your character's still alive, right? You keep all your items and your crafting materials. And so playing through Diablo 1, it was like very visceral to feel that my character dies, it's gone. It's supposed to be like a roguelike. I think David Brevik, who was the creator, thought that I think he envisioned it to be a roguelike. But I wonder if the difficulty that we see now, like games, I think back then were not meant to be everybody completes them. And so the experience for me growing up was like the fact that I made it to, the third level of the dungeon felt super enriching. And now it's like an annoyance. Why can't I beat the game? And so I guess that's my first question is like maybe the game shouldn't be beaten for everyone, right?
For sure. I would love to actually rewind the clock just like a bit further back too, because I think what you're saying is so important because really like games have gone from they've killed death, right? Death used to be a concept in video games. When you died 3 times in Mario, your game was over. When you died in the coin-based games, and this is what I'm going to get to, like there was a sense that you were done with the game. And that has kind of evaporated over time where now death is just an inconvenience. There's a cost to it. There's either money or time, and usually money is time anyways. Um, and if you like rewind the clock to all the way back before people had like personal home consoles, how did people monetize video games? They had a machine that had the software that you put a quarter in to play. And so games kind of needed that kind of stopping point so that other people could play the game, right? You need to have your 3 lives and then you die. You need to have your, you fight in a fighting game until you lose and then someone else gets to play and that kind of like increases the revenue. And so games were kind of incentivized to give you these like kind of short sessions, like spectacular sessions. And then as people started getting home consoles, like people had more time to play and they weren't so invested in, 20 or 10 cents usually like 5 cents back then, but like they weren't so invested in like a single run, like quite literally they weren't invested in a single run. And so you saw games do things like give save points and have continuity and have story that was actually like what's the word I'm looking for, sequitur. And so and then people in my generation, maybe in the generation before, like will remember this kind of stuff. And then you watch what games have become as like consoles made their way into every home and as there's been like the arms race of fidelity and stuff like that. Anyways, so like video games went from this thing that was supposed to have an end to now we want to marry you for life, right? If you're playing this MMO, we want you to play for 15 years. Or if you're playing our open world game, we want to make sure you have 200 hours to spend in it. We want to make sure that, and even whenever you spend 200 hours in our game, we're going to come out with some DLC that you can purchase because we still have you, by your throat. And so I think that practice is gone because games monetize differently now, and there's different expectations.
I totally agree.
God, I thought my computer froze up again.
Yeah, I was like, oh, he's disagreeing with me.
out.
Cut him immediately.
Okay.
Cut him. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, I mean, I think this topic it's been
Maybe
a
it's
huge.
not.
Oh,
Sorry, did I cut out?
You're
You
back.
did.
Yeah,
Hi,
you
welcome
did.
back.
Go ahead
Yeah,
and say what
okay.
you said.
Yeah, sorry. Somebody was calling me. But yeah, so I thought perhaps maybe the way they're thinking of it is that you're not supposed to, just steamroll through the game and you die many times, you restart, you maybe change your class or you go to a different area and you just try to problem solve through the game. That's how I interpreted the game. And then the other thing I was going to say is, so I didn't have any of the thoughts that you guys had because I'm not a game designer. And as I playing the Diablo games, I'm a programmer. And when I started to understand the level generation and the things that they were doing behind the Diablo games, I actually started to enjoy the games less and start getting annoyed more and more by the algorithms and the things they were putting into the item design and into the random generation of the games. And I was wondering if like that influences how you guys play the games, Are you when you play? Are you playing as an audience? Or are you playing as like a designer?
I think that when you get into game dev, there's a skill that you have to learn, especially as a designer, to sort of like shut that part of your brain off when you're playing games. And for me, it's something that I've gotten pretty good at, but I don't think any designer is like purely like I don't think it's 100% for any designer. Like I think that the games historically, especially as I got further into my career, the games that I've historically enjoyed the most are the games that haven't sort of like shocked me back into like game design brain. They're ones that have really sort of like transported me out of like John the game designer, and I'm just a kid sitting on a couch again, either like playing alongside my friends or like fully immersed in the experience. And those are pretty few and far between, I think, in general. And I just think for me as a professional designer, they're even fewer and further between, because part of my job is understanding what makes those things tick. So it is kind of like the adage of like once you see behind the curtain, you're forever changed. But at the same time, can like I've gotten really good at turning that off, and sort of selectively turning it back on when I want to learn, when I want the game to teach me something about being a better designer.
Yeah, I'm gonna plus one everything John just said, and I'm also gonna add that like when you've been doing it for long enough as well, I used to also be very like when I first got into game design, and anytime I could sense that something wasn't handcrafted or intentional, like, oh, this is just a copy paste of this with this on it, or this is RNG in a bad way because this algorithm is bad, or like this was just a garbage roll and they should probably protect you against this. And I'd be very allergic to that kind of thing because what I could smell was like the procedural generation, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm expecting this to be an art form, and I want this to be like an intentional experience from somebody that's putting it forward. Like you want a song to be that way, right? You don't want a song to just be a bunch of random smattering of chords that sometimes sound good whenever they're played next to each other. You want it to be thoughtful. You want it to be meaningful. You want to identify with it. You want to listen to the lyrics, all that stuff. And so, and then, and then as I matured as a game designer, I had seen enough instances where like even those intentional chords could be really bad, and mostly me. Like I'm not saying like I my chords are always good and everyone else is already bad. Like I've firsthand experienced the devastation of fucking up in a terrible way that like literally anything would have been better. Literally like RNG would have been better than the decision that I made. And then so I kind of not like gained a respect for things that are like either procedurally generated or based on an algorithm, or they were used. What I would associate that with was like, oh, you were just trying to make bloat, like you just wanted to make quantity instead of quality. And then I realized that like handcrafted does not quality make all the time, and sometimes it's actually better to find something that works and then use it based off of an algorithm to make itself better and to be like a self-perpetuating improvement machine. I
There's like a tolerance for that, right? Like
Yeah.
you gain like it's not really a respect for it, but there's like a tolerance
Yeah, I
for
think that's probably right.
that, right? Like, and that tolerance translates to games that like are sort of like middle of the road as well. I think that like I'm more tolerant of games that are lower quality, because I can switch that part of my brain on where it's like I'm here to learn. There are so many games that'll come through at like a 5 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10 that people will push aside, or they'll wait for a Steam sale or whatever, that often have like really really great ideas that just like missed on the execution. Like you said, Candace, like it's not someone intentionally playing a bad chord. Like the intention was that it was supposed to be great, but there's this miss. And if you, as a designer, if you can like learn from those moments, in other like if you can learn from the moments that other people like make a misstep, then it makes you so much better at your craft and at a speed that is not that's difficult to keep pace with otherwise.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Well, I guess we're at 7 o'clock. We actually got two people on the stand asking questions. I think we did a pretty good episode, everybody.
Yeah, me too.
It's going to be interesting to see whether this seems to have met from software's expectations for sales at the end of the day, because before this podcast, I was thinking, God, it's a new accessible Dark Souls. The reviews are high. This game's just been fucking killing it. And now after this episode, I feel like actually completely black-pilled on like everything they've tried to do to make it more accessible, because you all are saying like, no, it completely failed. They weren't paying attention to lessons, and they brought in George R.R. Martin and they burned that. Oof. And it's like, but I wonder, like, does From really care? It seems like the niche game is still there.
We're all designers, so we're going to be hypercritical, but
And again, like I think me and John both said, it's like it's one of the best RPGs you can play if you're the niche audience, and so you can't ignore the Metacritic score, right? You can't ignore this is in no way were any of us today trying to communicate that it was a bad game. It's a masterpiece in a lot of ways.
Oh,
you know,
yeah. That's not what I mean. I just mean it does sound like the accessibility expansion part of the Elden Ring pitch is like a little fraught, and I wonder what the kind of post-mortem on that will be. I mean, I'm sure I can, wait for the internet or someone else to tell me about it, but I don't know. Okay.
I just think it'll be interesting to see just where they go from here. Like, what is the next game? So is it continuing to be open world? Was this a one-off? It'd be interesting to see, yeah.
Well, I mean, it would be a lot of learnings to fold back up, but maybe people just want classic-ass Dark Souls. Who knows? Okay, we'll close it for this week. Thanks, everybody, for joining us as always. You can leave your topic suggestions in any of the channels. Thanks, John, again, for coming back. Please, obviously, do so however often you like. We love having you.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, and we have a really special episode coming up sometime soon. I think it's going to be next week. Chris,
or in 2 weeks. Yeah,
or in 2 weeks. Okay, yeah.
Yep,
Chris will let you know when the new previews dropped, and we will see you then.
All right.
Chris, want to send us
Later,
off?
gamers.
Okay. Bye, everyone.